When was the last time you felt something all the way through, instead of just watching it happen to you from somewhere behind your own eyes? Sit with that for a second, because it is not a small question. Think about the last time you laughed and it reached your chest instead of stopping at your mouth. Think about the last time you finished something and felt the finishing, instead of immediately scanning for what you got wrong. If you had to search for an answer, that search itself is the diagnosis, not sadness, distance. Aaron Beck spent his career studying that distance up close, in consulting room after consulting room, and he found something almost nobody tells you while you're living inside it. Depression is not a mood that simply happens to you. It is a system, built hour by hour, out of habits so small and so automatic, you would never think to call them habits at all. Which means, the thing keeping you distant from your own life right now is not some permanent flaw in who you are. It is a set of behaviors. Behaviors can be found. Behaviors can be interrupted. You have been calling this exhaustion character. It was never character. It was 7 specific habits hiding in plain sight. And today, you find every one of them. You told yourself it was temporary. Just this week, just until things calmed down, just until you had the energy to be good company again. That was months ago. Beck watched this pattern in patient after patient and noticed something specific. People rarely announce their withdrawal. They justify it in advance. They decide, quietly and without evidence, that seeing people is too difficult right now, or too meaningless, or that their mood makes them a burden nobody actually wants to carry. The invitation gets declined before it's even fully read. The message sits unanswered until answering it feels stranger than the silence itself. Here is what makes this habit so effective at keeping depression alive. Withdrawal doesn't just remove other people from your life. It removes the only reliable evidence you have against your own worst conclusions about yourself. You believe you're a burden, so you disappear. And the disappearing means no one gets the chance to prove you wrong. The belief was never tested, it just got older. Beck called this a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it is worth sitting with how mechanical that phrase actually is. Not metaphor, mechanism. You predict rejection or exhaustion, you act in a way that guarantees you'll never find out if the prediction was true, and the untested prediction gets filed away as confirmed fact. Depression doesn't need to be right. It only needs you to stop checking. So here's what checking actually looks like, according to the clinical work. Not a grand social re-entry, not forcing yourself to a party you dread. One specific, minor contact, a text back, a 10-minute coffee, sitting near someone at lunch instead of alone. Chosen not because you feel ready, but as an experiment. You are not trying to feel better before you do it. You are trying to find out whether the belief driving the isolation is actually true. Beck's patients almost never predicted their own reactions accurately. They expected to be a drain and found they were glad to have gone. That gap between what you predict and what actually happens is the whole point. This works because it doesn't ask you to believe anything different yet. It only asks you to test one small claim your mind has been treating as settled. Most people discover, uncomfortably, that the claim was never settled at all. It was just unexamined. But withdrawal has a partner. A patient can walk through the door of every relationship in their life and still stay frozen everywhere else. At the sink of dirty dishes, at the desk with the unanswered email, at the version of themselves that used to just start things. That's a different mechanism entirely, and it runs on something even more basic than fear of other people. It runs on the gap between wanting and doing, and understanding that gap is where real movement begins. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. You're on the couch, phone in hand, and you already know exactly what would help. A shower, a walk, texting the one friend who still checks in, and you don't move. Not because you decided not to, because some invisible switch that used to flip automatically just doesn't flip anymore. Here's what almost nobody explains about that switch. It has nothing to do with laziness, and very little to do with motivation in the way you've been taught to think about motivation. Researchers found something specific happening at the neural level in depression, a split between wanting and liking. Wanting is the drive that gets you off the couch before you've done anything. Liking is what you feel once you're already there, mid-task, having started. Depression doesn't usually touch liking much. It guts wanting, which means waiting to feel like doing something is not patience. It's a trap, engineered by the exact chemistry the depression is exploiting. You are waiting for a green light that the illness itself has switched off. Beck's clinical guidance for this is almost embarrassingly simple to say and genuinely difficult to live. When in doubt, do. Not because effort is virtuous, because the wanting doesn't come first anymore. The doing has to come first, and the wanting, if it comes at all, arrives after, as a kind of surprise. There was a woman in Beck's practice, badly depressed, who told her therapist after a session that she planned to go home and go to bed. He asked what she'd have done if she weren't depressed. She said she'd have stopped for her favorite coffee. So that went on the schedule. Then the grocery store, since she'd already be out. Then dinner, dishes, a show she used to like. None of it required her to feel like doing it first. It only required the plan to exist before the doubt had a chance to argue. This is the part worth taking literally, not as inspiration, but as instruction. Plan the next few hours of your day in specific small blocks, written down, before you feel any pull to do them. Not a productivity system. A workaround for a brain that has temporarily lost its ability to generate its own momentum. You are not proving your worth by finishing the list. You are testing, hour by hour, what Beck's research kept finding. That once people start, they very often discover they can still do more than they believed, and that doing it produces something closer to relief than the dread promised. There's a reason this matters beyond just getting things done. Every time you wait for the feeling, and the feeling doesn't come, depression collects one more piece of evidence that you're broken. Every time you act without the feeling, and the task gets done anyway, that evidence collapses. The inertia was never proof of anything about you. It was a chemical lag between wanting and doing, mistaken for a verdict. But inertia only explains why you don't start. It doesn't explain why, even when you do manage to start something, your world keeps getting smaller anyway. Fewer risks, fewer new things, fewer doors even considered. That's a separate habit, and it's the one quietly deciding, in advance, what you're even allowed to attempt. Avoidance feels like self-protection. It functions like self-erasure. Every time a task looks difficult, and you quietly decide not to attempt it, you're not just skipping one afternoon. You're teaching your own mind something about what you're capable of, and the lesson sticks whether or not it was ever true. Beck saw this constantly in his patients. The application not submitted, the phone call not made, the errand postponed indefinitely. Each one justified in the moment by a single silent verdict. I'm not capable of that right now. The task disappears from the to-do list. The verdict stays. This is where the world starts shrinking, not all at once, but one declined attempt at a time. The range of things you're willing to try gets smaller, month over month, until what's left feels less like a life and more like a holding pattern. And here's the part that makes it so hard to catch yourself doing it. Nobody experiences this as cowardice. It feels like accuracy. It feels like finally being honest about your limits. It isn't honesty, it's prophecy, and a self-fulfilling one. You expect to fail, so you never attempt the thing that would test whether the expectation was correct. And the untested expectation calcifies into fact. Beck's patients, when they finally did attempt what they'd been avoiding, discovered something almost embarrassingly consistent. They could usually do more than they believed, and the failure they'd been protecting themselves from mostly existed only in the forecast. So here's the intervention, and it's more literal than it sounds. Beck compares recovering the capacity for difficult tasks to recovering from a broken leg. Walking is hard for someone whose leg just healed, even though walking used to be effortless. And nobody looks at that person struggling across the room and calls it proof they were never capable of walking. It's proof they're rebuilding. The task now is the same size it always was. What changed is your current capacity to lift it in one motion, which means the task needs to be lifted in pieces instead. This is called graded task assignment, and it works by breaking the avoided thing into a piece so small it's almost insulting. Not clean the apartment, open the closet door, not apply for the job. Open the application page and type your name. You are not trying to finish the task today. You are trying to prove, in the smallest possible unit, that the prophecy of failure was wrong. Beck's patients who couldn't identify a single doable step were simply asked what had become too hard to do since they got depressed. And the answer, broken down far enough, always yielded a first move small enough to survive contact with a bad day. Do the smallest piece before the doubt gets a vote. That's the whole method. The world doesn't reopen in one grand gesture. It reopens one attempted door at a time. But some of what's shrinking your world isn't happening during the day at all. It's happening in the dark, hours before you're even awake enough to fight it. In the exact moment your mind is weakest and least defended. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebooks. Beyond the Shadow breaks down Jung's core ideas, while Dialogues with the Unconscious gives you a 30-day path to apply them in your life. Both are linked in the pinned comment. 3 a.m. or 4 or some hour before the alarm has any business going off. You're awake and your mind has already started replaying something. A mistake from years ago, a conversation you can't edit, a version of the future that hasn't happened and probably won't. You're not thinking about it. You're trapped inside it, on a loop that has no exit and no resolution, just repetition. Beck documented this pattern in patients with striking specificity. Not vague worry, but a particular kind of early waking, well before dawn, spent lying still and replaying loss. And here's what separates rumination from ordinary reflection, the distinction that matters clinically. Reflection moves somewhere. It examines a problem and eventually sets it down. Rumination doesn't move. It just runs the same defeat on repeat, keeping the nervous system locked in a threat state with no actual threat left to respond to and no action available to end it. This is the cruelty of the mechanism. Your body is bracing for danger that isn't there anymore, hour after hour, because the mind mistook a memory for a present emergency and never got the signal to stand down. Here's what makes rumination especially effective at fueling depression. It feels productive. It feels like you're solving something, processing something, finally getting to the bottom of it. You are not. You are rehearsing the same conclusion until it hardens into something that feels less like a thought and more like a fact about who you are. Beck's clinical strategy for this doesn't try to stop the thoughts by force, because that rarely works and usually backfires. Instead, patients are taught to redirect the ruminating mind by scheduling it. When the intrusive thought shows up mid-task, reading, working, trying to sleep, the instruction is simple. Write it down. Not analyze it, not resolve it. Just capture it in a notebook or on a phone, with a note to return to it later, at a specific time set aside for exactly that purpose. Worried rumination, deliberately postponed. This works for a precise reason. It doesn't ask you to pretend the thought doesn't matter, which almost never succeeds and often makes the thought louder. It separates the thought from the moment, giving your mind a place to put it down instead of demanding it disappear. Beck's patient who lost pleasure in something as simple as reading the newspaper wasn't failing to enjoy it. He was being pulled out of the article and into a spiral about his job, his failures, the state of the world. Once he learned to name the pull the moment it happened and set it aside for later, the newspaper started working as a newspaper again. Try this tonight. Specifically, keep something within reach of the bed. The next time you wake in the dark mid-loop, don't argue with the thought. Write 4 or 5 words that name it, and tell yourself, out loud if you need to, that it has an appointment tomorrow. Not now. Most nights, when tomorrow arrives, the thought that felt unbearable at 3 a.m. barely survives the walk to the notebook. But rumination doesn't only steal your nights. It steals the architecture of your mornings, the exact hours that decide, before you've even made a single conscious choice, what kind of day you're about to have. Your mornings are not blank. They already have an owner before you're conscious enough to compete for the job. And most days, that owner is whatever thought got there first. Beck saw this exact pattern in a patient prone to early morning insomnia, waking well before dawn, lying in bed, ruminating, with no plan and no reason to get up, before the mind had already run its worst material a dozen times. By the time the actual day began, the damage was done. Not because the day itself was hard, because the first hour of it had been surrendered, undefended, to whatever the depressed mind wanted to rehearse. This is what makes irregular, unstructured mornings such reliable fuel. The version of you that wakes up at 4 a.m. in the dark is not your most capable self. It's your most exposed one, tired, unguarded, with no scheduled task to interrupt the spiral. Ask that version of you to make good decisions about how to spend the next hour, and it will almost always choose to stay still and keep thinking, not from weakness, from simple lack of a competing plan. Beck's fix wasn't complicated, and that's exactly why it worked. He had his patient build the next morning the night before, while the more capable, less depleted version of himself was still awake to do the planning. Clothes laid out. A decision made in advance to shower and dress the moment the eyes opened. No negotiation required. A reason to leave the house early. Breakfast somewhere other than the kitchen table where the rumination usually happened. None of it depended on motivation at 6 a.m., because none of it required a decision at 6 a.m. Every choice had already been made by someone with more resources than the person who'd have to execute it. This matters more than it sounds like it should. The version of you making decisions at 11 p.m. is not the same version of you making decisions at dawn with no sleep and a mind already looking for something to catastrophize. Depression exploits that gap ruthlessly, waiting for the weakest possible version of you to be the one in charge of the first hour. Structure closes the gap. It doesn't ask the exhausted 6 a.m. self to be strong. It asks the more capable 11 p.m. self to make the choices in advance, so there's nothing left to decide. Try this tonight. Write down in one sentence exactly what you'll do in the first 10 minutes after you wake up. Not the whole day, just the first 10 minutes. Lay out whatever you need for it. Not because a plan defeats depression by itself, but because it takes the decision out of the hands of the person least equipped to make it well. Because here's what's easy to miss in all of this. Even once you're up, even once the morning has a shape, there's still the separate question of whether anything in that shape actually reaches you. Whether accomplishing something or enjoying something still registers as anything at all. Pleasure doesn't vanish in depression. It gets intercepted before it can register. This is a different problem than not doing enough, and it's one of the least understood pieces of the mechanism. You can force yourself through an activity that used to bring you joy, a favorite meal, a good book, time with someone you love, and still come away feeling nothing, and the emptiness that follows becomes its own kind of evidence. Proof, you conclude, that even the good things are broken now, that whatever made life enjoyable is simply gone. It isn't gone. It's being sabotaged in real time by a thought you don't even notice having. Beck's patient who'd lost all pleasure in something as ordinary as reading the newspaper wasn't lying about the flatness he felt. When his therapist asked what was actually going through his mind while he read, the answer came fast. Thoughts about losing his job, about the world falling apart. He wasn't reading the newspaper. He was reading 2 sentences of it, and then disappearing into a spiral about his own failure. And the spiral ate whatever pleasure the reading might have offered. Same story with washing his car. No sense of accomplishment afterward, because his attention had spent the entire task fixed on the one spot of the roof he couldn't quite reach, the section of upholstery he ran out of energy to finish. He did the task. He just never let himself register having done it. This is the mechanism worth naming precisely. Depression doesn't only reduce what you do, it corrupts your ability to credit yourself for what you did do, and it corrupts your ability to stay present for what you're doing while you're doing it. Both failures look identical from the outside, a person going through the motions, but they require different fixes. Here's the practical piece, and it's specific enough to use today. Beck asks patients to track 2 separate things after any activity, no matter how small. Did it produce a sense of mastery, real accomplishment, however minor? And did it produce a sense of pleasure, actual enjoyment in the moment? Not one combined verdict. 2 separate questions, because people are frequently starving one while assuming both are dead. If you can't name a single activity that gives you either, Beck's question is exactly this. What has become too difficult to do since you got depressed? The answers: paying a bill, grocery shopping, a shower before noon, go on the list, and completing them counts as mastery even when it looks, from the outside, like nothing at all. And when you do the activity and still feel nothing, catch what's happening in your head while you're doing it. If you're doing the dishes while your mind runs a highlight reel of everything wrong with your life, you were never really doing the dishes. Bring your attention back to the water, the plate, the actual sensation of the task. Not as mindfulness performance, but because that's where whatever pleasure exists is actually located, and it can't reach you anywhere else. 6 habits now sit in front of you, each one small enough to miss and consequential enough to keep the whole system running. But there's a 7th, quieter than the rest, and it's the one running underneath all 6. The voice that decided, long before any of this started, exactly how to interpret everything you do. Every one of the 6 habits already covered has an accomplice, a voice that decides, before any evidence comes in, what your effort was actually worth. Beck called this the negative cognitive triad, and it's worth understanding exactly how mechanical it is. 3 fixed judgments, running quietly underneath everything. A verdict on yourself, incompetent, unlovable, or both. A verdict on the world, indifferent at best, hostile at worst. A verdict on the future, more of the same, indefinitely. None of these arrive as conclusions you reasoned your way toward. They arrive first, as assumptions, and then recruit whatever evidence fits. Here's where it gets specifically brutal. When you fail at something, the voice doesn't call it a bad day or a hard week. It calls it proof, evidence of a permanent defect finally showing itself. But when you succeed, the same voice refuses the credit. A promotion becomes luck. A friend's warmth becomes pity. A good outcome becomes an accident that happened to you rather than something you built. Beck watched this asymmetry in patient after patient. Failure treated as identity, success treated as coincidence. It isn't honesty. It's a rigged scale, weighted every single time toward the worst possible reading of who you are. This is why the other 6 habits are so hard to escape, even once you know about them. You can force yourself into a conversation, start the task, structure the morning, and this voice will still find a way to file the outcome as further proof of what it already decided about you. It's the operating system the other habits run on. Beck's clinical answer isn't to argue yourself into feeling better. It's 3 questions, asked the moment the voice delivers its verdict. What is the actual evidence for this? Not the feeling, the evidence. Is there another explanation for what happened? One you dismissed too fast to notice dismissing it? And even if the worst version is true, what does it actually imply? Not the catastrophe your mind jumped to, but the real, specific consequence. Beck's patients, asking themselves these three questions after a rejection, a mistake, a bad day, discovered something consistent. The verdict rarely survived the cross-examination. Not because they lied to themselves, because the verdict had never been tested in the first place, only assumed. Try this the next time the voice speaks, and it will speak today. Don't argue with the conclusion. Interrogate the evidence for it, out loud if you have to. That's the whole method, and it's the same method underneath every habit in this video. Not forcing a feeling, but refusing to let an untested belief run the show. Here's what actually changes, and it isn't sudden. It's not one insight that rewires everything at once. It's a withdrawal you decide not to justify. A task you start without waiting to want it. A door you open by an inch instead of avoiding entirely. A thought you write down instead of living inside. A morning you build the night before. A moment of pleasure you let yourself actually register. A verdict you interrogate instead of obey. 7 small refusals, repeated, are the only mechanism strong enough to starve something that was never fed by one dramatic failure, only by thousands of quiet, uncontested ones. The habits were never proof of who you are. They were just habits. And habits, unlike identities, can be replaced one deliberate repetition at a time. Thank you for spending this time here. If it reached something in you, the video already on your screen was chosen because it belongs right after this one. Click to continue watching.